I wanted to ask a question and make a comment regarding the statement I've heard from you many times about making it about them, not about me. And I've also heard you talk about the value, or it seemed like you were talking about the value of authenticity, of being yourself, and letting it all hang out there and just dealing with the results. So from the point of view of evolving my consciousness, would it generally be better to focus, consciously focus my intention on serving or helping other people, or would I be better off just trying to focus on being authentic, just being in the moment, and whatever comes out of my mouth comes out of my mouth?
Okay, it's the best way to approach it is the second one first, leading to the first one. And what I mean by that is, if you are being authentic and just the way you are is the way you are, if that's not good, if the way you are is a problem, then that will create problems, just being the way you are. You know, you won't, things won't work well for you. So then you have an incentive to change. So the good thing about being authentic is that it's a good teacher. Because if you're authentically grumpy or authentically, nasty or whatever else, and you're just being yourself, then you'll get feedback about that. And if you're paying attention, then it'll be good feedback to change. That's why authentic is good. That doesn't mean just be whatever you are and to hell with what anybody thinks about it. You should be who you are, let anybody think what they want, but learn from it. You see, that's the difference. Now, once you learn from it, what that does is make you a kinder, gentler, more loving person, because people will like you if you're kind and loving and gentle. That's nice. It's the other stuff that you'll get the lessons about. So you will then be kinder. You'll help the little old ladies across the street. You'll do all that naturally because that's the way you are, and you get that way by being authentic. Now, on the other hand, if we're not talking about authentic, if we're talking about acting, and we say, okay, I should be about other. Well, it's going to all be about other. So when I see other people's needs, I'll focus on those and I'll just stuff my own down. I'll put that under the rug. I'm not going to deal with that. That's acting. It's not being. And if you're acting, you're running your life with your intellect. You're doing it because you think that's what you should be doing. And if you do that, there's probably very little growth in it. That's not much of a growth path because it's the wrong intent. It's the wrong reason. I'm doing this because I think I should, rather than I'm doing this because that's the way I am. So your answer is both. You should focus on other, but not through the intellect. The reason you focus on other is because you're authentic and you care about other. That's the reason. And if you focus on other for any other reason other than that, it's not helpful. You're just playing a role. And as you play a role, that's not really something you're going to learn a lot from unless that role brings you grief. Because if it's not really you and you're just focusing on others, others will very soon get the idea that you're not authentic. You're not really caring about them. You're playing some kind of role to them. And then they expect that you expect that they should have a particular reaction and they should be grateful because you are doing this and all these expectations, and that just kind of turns sour in a relationship and doesn't work very well. So yes, you do need to you do need to be focused on other, but not because it's an intellectual thing that you think you ought to do. Wrong reason. It's because that's the way you feel. And you won't know how you feel if you're not authentic, because then you're always playing a role. And people who play a role all their time, their problem is, who am I? Who's the real person in here? They don't know because they've never been authentic. They've always done what they thought they were supposed to do and how they were supposed to do it and how people expected they would do it. And they cared about what people thought rather than being who they were. So they always were acting. And many people don't know who they are. They really don't know. If their image that they've created has been their life, they feel frightened. to step outside of that image. That's what everybody thinks of them. That's how people know them. You know, it's how their friends relate to them. And if they step outside of that, what's going to happen? It's a scary thing, being authentic. You see, what's going to happen if I'm just me? What if I'm just me and nobody likes me? Well, that's not a problem. If nobody likes you, then learn something from that. Why don't they like you when you're just being you? You know, there may be a reason for that. And use that as a way to feedback, as a way to grow, you see? And if it's, well, I don't care what anybody thinks, to hell with them, I'll be however I am, then that's not somebody looking for feedback. That's somebody who's basically arrogant and doesn't really give a damn and is just going to do what they want. See, there's a difference. So it's not the actions, it's not what you do that's important, it's why you do it. It's the intent of why you do it. So that's how those two things that seem like maybe they're contradictory actually aren't.
I understand, because if I'm trying to be helpful to you because I think it's the right thing to do, that's not authentic, that's an intellectual action, and it's probably targeted at winning points somehow. But if I'm just coming from here, it's either going to be appropriate or not. And if it's not going to be appropriate, I'll get the feedback at the gut level, and the lesson will come sort of from the gut, rather than from the head.
Exactly. And doing things because you think it's what you're supposed to do, that can be civilizing. You know, some people are much more polite and thoughtful because that's what they're supposed to do. You know, you have our culture expects certain things of you. And if you're just playing to that cultural role that you should be in, you're just kind of drifting in life and you're not really learning much. You're just going through the motions of filling out a role without really owning it. It's not you. You see, and many people go through their whole life like that. Don't know who they are, they're playing a role, it's what their culture expects. And they think that's the right thing. And they never really know who they are and what they would do. So that's why I say at first, get authentic, just do it. But keep your eyes and ears open in case, you know, that doesn't work so well for everybody else around you. And if so, find out why. Grow, right? Then the lesson's at the gut level. And then it means something because now you change. But you first got to be willing to change. You first have to have enough humility to say, you know, I'm going to be authentic and I'll let the chips fall where they may, but if I need to change, I will. Because it's not just all about me. So that's the way to go. And then after that, you are the kinder, gentler person because it's there. Now you're helping the little old lady across the street because you look at her and you see there's a problem and she's having a lot of anxiety and you just want to help, rather than, oh, you know, I'm going to be a good Boy Scout and I'll do what I should do. There's a little old lady, I'll drag her across the street whether she wants to go or not. Two different approaches to the problem.
Okay, thank you.
I've heard you say several times that sort of the average consciousness on this planet is nursery school level. And I'm just wondering, the concept of a psychopath. Like, apparently they have no empathy or compassion, and they have no potential to grow. Why are they here? And they are, you know, a percentage of our population.
Yeah. Well, it's not true that they have no no opportunity to grow or no, you know, quality or no proclivity to growth. They do. They're making one wrong choice after another. And there's a psychological thing called cognitive dissonance that you don't want to pour good after bad, so you don't admit that what you're doing is ever bad and you keep doing it and doing it so that you don't have to admit that you've not, you know, been doing it right all along. And people tend to get in downward spirals with that. If you're grumpy and people accuse you of being grumpy, then in your mind you think, well, grumpy's good. I have a reason to be grumpy. My grumpy is that's who I am, you know, and you become proud of being grumpy, which makes you grumpier, and people like you less, which makes you even more proud of being grumpy. And so it descends into a problem to where you are committed to being grumpy, whether you feel grumpy or not. Such people can turn around. Now, some sociopaths may be a biological problem, not necessarily a consciousness problem. It might be a biological problem. In other words, it's a rule set problem. The way their biochemistry just happened to come out while, it was being put together is a very chancy thing with a lot of uncertainty in it. And if it just comes out in such a way that that part of their avatar is not capable of feeling those feelings. We start with maybe an Asperger's, which is a very light version of autism perhaps. And those people don't relate empathetically. They don't relate personally with people. They relate more with things, maybe whatever, just information. They relate with sometimes math, and sometimes with computers, and sometimes with music and other things, and they relate very strongly to that. But people, relationships, they just don't get, it doesn't connect. Well, that's a limitation now that the rule set has put with that avatar. That's just the way they are. But that's also a challenge. It's maybe a tough challenge, but it's a challenge for the individual who has to deal with that. The old rule, stuff happens and you get to deal with it. Well, it's a tough one to deal with, but it can be dealt with. And you can deal with it best you can, but it's even more so a problem for everybody else to deal with. You see, because if people deal with that in a very negative way, if they interact with people that have Asperger's or autism in a negative way, they create more negativity. And that's a very quick feedback system. So it gives all the rest of us a chance to act with compassion and caring for those people, not to take it personally if they don't act in the prescribed way of our culture. They seem to be brusque and with no tact and that sort of thing. Not let our ego get wrapped around that. That's a challenge for us, because when somebody's like that with us, we immediately get our ego up and we don't like it, and we fuss back or we get rude. So it's a challenge for everybody. So it's a learning opportunity that's there for everyone that interacts with that person and for the person themselves. So sometimes it's biochemical. It's not really a failed consciousness so much as it is a consciousness that's got an avatar that has that limitation. But sometimes it's not biochemical, it's just the individual personality, and they've kind of worked their way into this spiral of being a curmudgeon. And now that's their persona, so they play it up.
What about the ones that are born?
Well, if they're born that way, it can be two reasons. One is that they have those problems. Let's say in their consciousness, they're just very self-centered. They're just extremely self-centered. They haven't grown very much. They're high entropy consciousness that's very self-centered, and that's just the way they are. And they don't really relate to people because people aren't important. They're important. Everybody else is optional, you see. And if you have that, if that's the level of your consciousness, then that's the way you are. Or you might be born that way because of the biochemistry. It might be something you inherit. You may have parents or grandparents who are like that, and you get that biochemistry because now that's in your genetic makeup, and your probability of getting that is a lot higher than the average person, and that may be your reason. But it doesn't matter what the reason is, we have to interact with those people, whatever their reason is, and that can be very educational for the rest of us as well.
So that's why the larger consciousness
Would allow that?
Yeah, why the larger consciousness would allow it? Yeah, it just happens. The larger conscious system doesn't kind of judge everything that happens and say, oh, I allow this, no, I don't allow that. Stuff happens. And the randomness in biochemistry is large. I mean, there's a whole lot of ways. There's millions and probably billions of ways things can go together, and the way things can grow and happen and work out. And all of that stuff just happens the way it happens. That's the rule set with its uncertainty. So it allows that because that's just life. That's the way it happens, and it allows the consciousness to be very self-centered because that's the way it is when you have a very high entropy consciousness. So it's not a matter of allowing it. You shouldn't think of the larger consciousness system as the judge that's playing with his pet people, and he can take this away or that, or if this happens, you know, why does the larger conscious system allow poor people to be so poor and to suffer and that kind of thing? I mean, it must be a really mean system, you know, to let the poor people suffer. It's not like that. Why we're here is to be in learning situations. We're here to grow up. We're not here to feel good. We're here to grow up. And if you grow up well, you feel good too. You get them both. If you're struggling, you don't. If you end up with a damaged avatar that has limitations, then you deal with that. Or maybe an avatar that's in a culture that has limitations. You deal with that. So everything's a learning opportunity. And we look at some of them and say, oh, how awful. But they're still learning opportunities. And they happen. And the larger conscious system is mostly a hands-off kind of thing. Just let this thing run out the way it runs out. That way it's honest. It's an honest game if there's very little meddling.
Okay, thank you.
In, I think, one of your videos, you talk about a test question that you've been asked, where you're in a culture and you're sort of responsible for the well-being of that culture. Mm-hmm. And that you have to make a decision about whether to stay in that culture where you're very important for the well-being of the people, or to leave and to continue growing in other experiences. And when you were talking about this, you said the right answer was that you had to leave and go on to evolve further, because you were being very helpful, but you weren't evolving. And can you explain how that idea squares with the notion that it's all about other?
You know, there's lots of traps that you can fall into. And one of the traps is a trap of being needed, being necessary, and being important. That can be a trap that you can fall into. You can get stuck in that thought to where you can't get beyond it. You can't move on because, you know, other people are dependent on you. And you probably get dependent on them too, because their dependence on you makes you, you know, feel needed and so on. So it can get to be a codependent kind of relationship. That's a trap. So there comes a point where you can do this one thing, which was serving the needs of this group of people, or you can go on. You see, now going on opens up a whole bunch of potentiality of other things that you can be. There may be more people that you can serve in a better way that's maybe more significant, or maybe more people, or whatever. And if you just stay here, then all the rest of that potentiality is lost because you're just stuck in this one thing. Now, maybe this one thing is just what you need. You've maybe worked your way up to this thing, and you may want to stay there for a long time. But eventually, if it's similar, the experiences are similar. You keep having, you know, it's basically the same kind of experience that you're having, the same kind of challenges. They get old. You're not learning a lot from them anymore. It's suboptimal as far as your learning goes. And the people that you're serving, it probably gets very suboptimal for them too, because they're also stuck in a rut where you're serving this need for them, then they won't necessarily serve that need for themselves. They may not grow up to serve that need for themselves because you're here doing it for them all the time, you see, and the whole thing gets stale. Now in the beginning, maybe it was fresh for everybody. Fresh for me, learning new things, learning how to give and care, and fresh for them because they just needed the help, and it got them more stable and that. But eventually, if you just keep turning that same crank, it gets old and wears out, and nobody's really learning much anymore because we're just going through the same motions that we've been doing. Our interactions are the same and whatever. Yes, I'm still being the helper, and yes, they're still being helped, and we're all getting along very nicely, and if I go, who's going to help them? But it's really time to move on. It's time to give everybody a set of new challenges. So that not only moves me on to a set of new challenges, but it moves them on to a set of new challenges as well. And again, it's not about life being easy, it's about life being instructive, about learning from it. So that may mean that they have to suddenly do things differently. They may have to do things for themselves or find other people to help them or whatever, or maybe do without. And all of those choices are probably instructive for them. And at the time, I needed to go on. This was a test question, and I do believe that the correct answer was move on. That was my sense of it, but I don't know if I said it when I talked about it then, but at this particular test, that was like the last question. That was the last question in the series, and the way this particular test worked, if I got it right, I got another question. If I got that right, I got another question. If I got one wrong, I was done. Well, this was the last one, and I thought I got it right. Felt right, but it ended the series. I didn't go on with another one. I thought that was because it was done. So when I say that was the right answer, that's what I think was the right answer. But you know, in these you don't know, because it's tough making these decisions. But that's the way I felt about it, that everybody would learn. Everybody would grow by changing the situation. Routine gets to be a trap. If you just keep doing the same thing over and over, you can get trapped in that, and it's so comfortable that it feels good, and you just kind of let it go because you're afraid if it changes, maybe it'll get worse. And it's not really so bad. It's kind of nice. It could be worse, and you have to have the courage to move on and give it the opportunity to get worse. You know, maybe it won't be good if you move on, but it will be challenging, and that's the point. Not keeping it feeling good. So that's sort of, yeah, I got a nice niche here. You know, I'm in this groove and everything's working all right. Let's just do that and do that and do that. And pretty soon your life is going by and just not learning very much because you're not being challenged. It's too easy. It's too routine. And then it's just time to move on. And it's the same for all the other people that you're doing this thing with. All of you are in the same kind of rut. And sometimes it's time to just change. Take on new challenges. And it's not the point, well, is this going to be better for me or worse for me? That shouldn't be the way you look at it. It should be, I need new input. I need new challenges. I'm going to go do new things. Now, obviously, you don't walk out and leave somebody stranded in a dire situation. That wouldn't be responsible. But you get your affairs in order and get everything wound up best you can. Tell everybody you're leaving, get ready. You know, in a month I'm going, and then you go on. Do your thing and grow from it. But you have to not be afraid of change. And most of us fear change. We don't like things to change because we don't know how it's going to end up. Change is scary because we don't know. So does that kind of pull all the pieces together? Yeah. So it's not like, well, I just decided it was time to walk out on these poor needy people because, you know, it was time for me to move on. It's all about me and not about them. It was time for them too to move on from the same thing.
And by the same token, if you grow, then the larger consciousness grows, which then turns around and helps those people as well.
Well, that's true. The one has spoken.
And when it comes to conceiving children, is there the best way of doing it from the consciousness perspective? And can we somehow choose to pick up the soul that would come to our family? And can we influence somehow this process?
Yes, indeed, you can. Now, that doesn't mean that you have control over it. It can make it be however you want. But your intention, again, changes probable future. If your intention is that a connection with a particular entity would be very acceptable, what you'd like, then that raises the probability that that will happen. If your intention is, I'm happy with whatever I get, you know, just want to be a healthy, happy child, and if that's it, that's all I want, then those probabilities then are more even. You're not trying to push the probability up for a specific thing happening. So you can use that intention. When one of my daughters was still in utero, I asked her what she would like to be called. What name? You were picking out names, right? Of course, I didn't know that it'd be a daughter. That was back in the days. You just didn't know until after the birth happened. And I said, well, what name would you like? And I got the name Liana. Well, her middle name's Liana. So you can interact at that at that point. You can just take whatever comes, or you can have some idea, and even after they're here, you can interact with that. So yes, it's a thing that you can work with. So what's the best way? The best way to conceive a child is in love, you know, and it's the intent, it's the attitude that goes with the intent. People who are trying to conceive a child and it's because they want that child and they're purposely trying to conceive that child, they tend to have problems conceiving the child. They're the ones that can't have a child after 6 or 7 years of trying to have a child. They adopt. As soon as they adopt, they have a child. You know, they get pregnant and have a child. The reason for that is their intention is not helpful. Their intention is, I want to do this. They're trying to force a situation to be the way they want it. They're doing something, but it's all from the intellect. It's not for the right reasons. I'd like to have a baby, you know. I'd like to have a child. I'd like to do this. And it's kind of this loving, intuitive, embracing sort of thing rather than this intellectual drive. The intellectual drive actually prohibits things like that from happening. It's not coming out of the being level, it's coming out of the intellectual level, and the intellectual level often causes a lot of noise. So if it's something that just happens to people who are in love and are ready for a family, then you've got the optimum circumstance for that child. It's not somebody trying to make a preconceived notion come true, and they're working basically they're trying very hard to make the world be the way they want it. And that's usually frustrating because the world resents being pushed into the way you want it, and it tends to go the other way. It doesn't like that. So it's typically like people that want to experience out of body, you know, they will sometimes say, I really want to do this, I want to do it, and they'll lie down, they'll try to do it. And as much as they try to push that to happen, that end point doesn't happen. And then they say, I quit, I give up, you know, I'm not going to do this anymore. It just never happens to me. That's when they have the out of body. Because now they've relaxed. Now it's not an intellectual drive, it's just them, it's how they feel, they're relaxed, and then it can happen. And it's the same with having children. You need to approach it the same way. So let the intellect go, although you need some intellect involved. Are you ready for children? Can you afford children, you know? Do you have a good situation and so on? That's part of the intellect. But that should be kind of the surface thing. Once you get by that, it ought to be just what comes natural. And it ought to all be in joy and with happiness, and it just feels right. And then the situation will be right.
When you're dealing with courage, how do you keep the intellect out of the way when you're trying to deal with something courageously, fears that you may have?
Well, you don't have to. Yeah, it's hard to push the intellect out of the way because most of us live in we all live in this culture where the intellect is dominant. This is a left brain dominant culture. And we learn to use that intellect to make all of our decisions. And we just talked with Afram about this idea of, you want to make the decision out of the being level, not out of the intellectual level. And it's the same with the courage. The courage really needs to come out of the being level. You have to just want to do it enough that you do it. And the intellect can help mainly by getting out of the way and letting you be and not saying, oh no, don't do that, you know, that's not going to work. It kind of does the fear thing. That gets in the way, and that's your intellect. Your intellect is worried about what's going to happen and is it going to be good for you. And if you can just let your intellect, if you can let that go, then don't worry so much that your intellect has to build the courage or create the courage. The courage ought to come from a deeper level than your intellect. It's your intellect that's mainly getting in the way by being fearful and judging, what's going to happen. If I do this, then what's going to happen? And what you have to come to is that I want to do this. I want to be this. And I want to be this enough to step into the future and see what happens. And that's, again, being authentic. If this is you and this is what you want to do, then you Have the courage to just do it and see what happens. Now, if what happens is something that is encouraging, well, then you'll take the second step and the third step. If what happens is that you get bitten, then you'll have to assess that and say, well, why? You know, I did this and it's hard. Does that mean I just need to keep going? I can't let these little things bother me, and that's my lesson there? Or does this mean that maybe I'm not doing the right thing for the right reason? And you think about it. And if you still want to do it, and it still seems like the right thing, then you take the next step. If it's the wrong thing, you'll get that feedback. And you can always say, boy, what a dummy. Why did I want to do that? You can always go backwards and say, well, all right, I'm not going to do that anymore. Now, maybe you can't go back to where you were, because a lot of things aren't reversible, right? You can't just take 2 steps backward and be right where you were. It's different now because you left, and going back may not be possible. It's all right. You got all the rest of your life. Go live it. Do it. Meet the challenges. Deal with what comes. Learn, grow, rather than looking for security and looking for not making mistakes. Make mistakes. That's how you learn. Don't be afraid of them. So that's how, you know, you kind of have that attitude, not at the intellect, but at the gut level. You'll do a lot better. And then you won't have this sense of, is this a good idea or not? You'll know. It won't be from up here having to tell you that. If it's up here telling you whether it's a good idea or not, it's probably you don't really know. You're trying to psych yourself up one way or the other. You know, you're trying to talk yourself into something. It's best just to do it from here. Pay attention to what's happening, learn from it. But you accept the consequences that way. There are consequences for making decisions. And you have to say, well, when I do this, everything's going to change. I'll deal with it. And I'll grow from it. I'll learn from it. It might be painful. I'll learn from it. I'll grow from it. And that's how you go on forward. If you say, oh, I'm not so sure, that might be painful. I don't know that I really want to do that. I'm pretty comfortable here. You're stuck. You see, fear has you stuck now. You can't get out of where you are. You're playing a role and you're stuck in it. So that's the courage. The courage is really not to overcome the fear so much as it's just the courage to be who you are. Just be it and go out there and do it, but keep your eyes open as to what the consequences are or why, and realize you've got the responsibility for the action, and you'll learn from it. But there's almost nothing that you can do that you can't learn from. Everything's educational. If you don't do something wrong and you break something that you wish you hadn't have broken, you'll learn from it, and you'll go on, and you'll find new things. And you may break some of those too, and you'll find new things. And there's always going to be opportunity. And eventually, it turns out to be that everything is great. Everything's good. You keep finding new things and new opportunities, and they're all wonderful. And you wouldn't have been there if you hadn't made these decisions that you found, you see? You don't know any of that. But when you meet the world with positive intent, good things happen. And they just continue to happen. So what you find out is it's not so scary, really. It's kind of adventuresome. Step off into the unknown and see what happens and deal with it and learn from it. And if you have that attitude, then your fear will tend to go away. You'll be explore. That's what explorers do, right? And they don't know what they're getting into, but they go explore it anyway just because they want to. And that's the kind of way you have to go through life, is as an explorer, not timid. But that doesn't mean you won't make mistakes. Just learn from them and go on. But every step will take you someplace interesting. Every step will take you someplace where there's opportunity. There's almost nothing you can do that doesn't present you with a wonderful opportunity to learn. Yeah, no matter what it is, whether it turned out to, be a regretful decision or not, it still puts you in a place where there's great opportunity to learn, and life will turn positive for you if you're positive.
Tom, you'd mentioned about going through and changing things, that it was really about evolving your own consciousness and not about evolving others. And I guess the other piece of that, though, is that it seems that what you're doing here and what you do with what you're doing with the book is really helping to create an environment and awareness or opportunities for other people to see something or have have something appear that you help them see something that would help them move along a path. So
Right.
could you speak to the
Sure.
kind of those two pieces?
Yeah. You can't change anybody but yourself. So there is no point for me looking at you and saying, you know, this guy, he's got a little too much ego here, he's got this and that, you know, he's not very nice, you know, he's rude to people. I could really help him, you know, so I go up and say, you know, you need to change, and here's how you need to change. Well, your instinctual reaction to that is to push back. That's just the way you feel. Doesn't matter whether it's true or false, you just push back from that. That's not very effective. What I've done is made it harder for you to see any of that or make those changes, because now you're in denial. No, I'm not like that. This guy's a jerk. You heard what he just told me, you know? So that's a problem. So you can't help anybody by explaining things to them or anything else. The one thing you can do, though, is you can create an environment in which it's easier for other people to grow on their own, in their own way. You can create that environment. And generally what that environment entails is security. People who feel secure enough to be authentic. If you feel secure enough, then you can just go out and be and learn from it. If you're not all that secure, then you're afraid to be and what you might be, and you don't know what you are, and all that's too scary. So you can create an environment where people feel like, yeah, this is a good idea. I should look at this. I should look at my ego. I should look at my anger. I should look at these things, because, you know, if I've got any of this stuff, you know, it's holding me back. So now you want to go look and find these things and look at them and grow and change. But if I come up and tell you about it, you don't want to look at those and grow and change. You want to push back in the opposite direction. So I'd actually, if I tried to do that, then it would hurt you. It would make you less likely to grow up, because I try to directly help you grow up by explaining to you what it is you need to do. You see, so that's the thing. You can't force growth. Can't force somebody to grow up, but you can give them an environment where they can look at themselves, feel secure, and like, this is a good thing to do. And then they can grow on their own. So that is something that you can do. And in a relationship, the way you help the other person in your relationship to grow is by giving them the space and the security in which to do that. If they feel totally secure in that relationship, now they're secure enough to be themselves. They're secure enough to be authentic. And if you're gentle with the way you react to that, then they'll also grow from it. They'll see the parts that they're creating that are problems and want to change those. But the minute you start giving instructions, you need to do this, you're not doing that well enough, whatever, you know, they'll back up and go the other way. Even, you know, take an animal, I have 4 dogs. You know, if you take one of those dogs and set him here and you push him, just gently push him, let's say on the back haunches, or push him on the shoulder, what that dog will do is resist. That dog doesn't know why you're pushing him. I mean, you're not slapping, you're just pushing him. But whatever you do, whatever direction it is, front, backwards, up, down, anyway, the dog will resist, because we don't like being pushed. We don't like being manipulated. We don't like somebody else trying to make us do something. We resent it and don't like it. So if you try to deal with people like that, they will just push back. And it's not that the dog says, oh, he wants me to go right and I really don't want to go right. It's just instinctual. Something pushes him to the right, he leans to the left. That's the way we are. And we people are just like the puppies are. We act the same way. So it's actually counterproductive to try to help somebody grow up directly. But indirectly, giving them the environment, now they feel set free. You come in here, and instead of somebody telling you, you got a lot of ego and need to do something about it, you know, you come to that same conclusion. Gee, I got a lot of ego and need to do something about it. Now that's valuable. The first one will hurt you, the second one will set you free. So that's what you can do, and that's how we solve this big problem that Aubrey brought up, you know, with our dysfunctional attitude toward the environment, toward each other, toward other critters. That dysfunctional environment is going to last until we outgrow it, And if you decide that, well, you know, I'm going to fight for whatever, animal rights, or I'm going to fight for the environment, or for, you know, end the wars or something. The way I'm going to fight is that if I see you wearing a fur coat, I'm going to spray paint you, you know, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to get up on the ramparts and call you names because you're the stupid people that are screwing up this reality for the rest of us, you know, that sort of thing. What you're doing there is making the problem worse. It's like pushing the dog. The reaction to that is to resist and push back the other way. You're just making the enemy more entrenched in his position, more dedicated to pushing back. You see, you're not really helping by reacting that way. That's because your ego, your fear, you know, your need to control is going out there trying to fix something with force. And if you fix something with force, even if you're successful in changing it symptomatically, you got to create another monster. Because that's, if you haven't changed at the being level, that same person with that same low quality consciousness is going to bubble up some other place, even though you shut that one off with a law or something else. They're still like that, and it's still going to show some other place. So you haven't gained anything. So we should all be trying to help give other people a secure environment in which they can grow up, kind of a reason to grow up. And we should be doing it without instructing them or telling them or demanding it of them or calling them names or anything else, because that doesn't help. That hurts. So that's the thing when I was answering Aubrey's question, why I said, you know, how to save the world and yourself at the same time. Because you can be out there trying to save the world and end up destroying yourself and actually being part of the problem with the world. And yet your motivation, you say, well, my intent's good. Well, not really. Your intent is very self-centered. Your intent is, this is what I want. I want people to be like this. And if they're not like this, well, then I'm going to raise hell. You see, that's just self-centeredness. That's not really caring about the world as it is, this is the way I want it. And your ego gets wrapped up in it, and now you're not really very effective for anybody. Not for yourself, not for the world. And then you get upset. You live in such a crappy place with all these dumb people, and you know, your life is unpleasant. And you go through life like that, complaining all the way, and you miss all the good stuff because you're focused on all the bad stuff. And there's plenty of bad stuff to focus on. But you can't approach it like that and still grow up effectively. It stops you from growing up, because now where are all those positive thoughts that are bringing good things to you? You know, now you're in this grouchy part where all you see is the evil that everybody's doing. And without intending to it, you become part of it. You're part of that dysfunctionality. You're part of that ego and arrogance and stuff that's creating the problem. You're just on the other side. Both sides are part of the problem if they're working at it that way. So how do you save the world and still have a happy, positive attitude when, you know, animals are being tortured and people are starving to death and all this other kind of stuff? Well, that's the way you need to be. You need to have a positive attitude. I'm going to do what I can do. I'll try to help people. I'll educate. I'll talk to people about that. Try to raise awareness. But I won't dislike them if they don't agree with me. I'm just going to plant seeds and do all this. Well, you get enough people doing that, and it makes a big difference. And I'm going to be an example. If I'm talking about get rid of your ego and whatever, and I've got this big ego, so I'm going to tell everybody about how they need to get rid of their ego because I've got this big ego. You see, that's a poor sales technique, right? that doesn't work. You know, they look at you and say, that doesn't work. So you can lower your own entropy, and that will serve as a really meaningful example to other people. If your life is good and solid and happy and you're a cheery guy, people want to be around you. They want to have your attitude. How's that guy get like that? See, so that's what you can do. There's really not a dichotomy between yeah, it's about yourself and growing up. It is, but it's also what can you do to make an environment so other people can grow up. In the beginning, there's not much you can do because you're still not very grown up yourself. You can't really provide an environment for the people to grow up in until you've grown up yourself. It doesn't work, because if you're full of ego and it's all about you and you're arrogant and you say, all right, what I'm going to do is provide an environment for other people to grow up. You grow up. You see, it doesn't work because you're arrogant, you have a lot of ego, and you can't implement that plan. As you do grow up, you can, and you do, because that's just part of what you do. It's what you want to do, is interact with people and let them see a bigger picture. So it all kind of goes together. It's not really that they're counterproductive.
And just part of that as well, it seems also that there are probably people that would be a good fit for any particular environment or want to grow in that way, and it's not everybody that you're trying to get.
Yeah, it's not like you're going to be the Messiah that's going to, change everybody's mind and everybody's going to be happy and full of love afterwards. You have to realize that when people are ready, they'll change. And when they're not ready, it doesn't matter what you tell them or what kind of opportunities you give or what kind of environments you make for them. This is not ready, they're not going to change. It's a personal thing. It won't happen until they're ready. And you have to accept that. So if there's somebody out there doing something you think is awful, and they just don't get it, they don't see that it's awful. Instead, they think that you're kind of goofy, instead of they thinking that they're awful. There's nothing you can do about that. You just have to let that be. You're not going to affect everyone.
Tom, we talk and we act like we're individuated units of consciousness working our way up the consciousness evolutionary ladder. Well, if that's true, who or what is at the top of that food chain? Who's at the top of the LCS ladder? And who or what created the LCS? Who's the boss?
Well, that answer kind of comes in two parts. And one is that what's at the top of the ladder is a larger consciousness system that is just consciousness. Same as us. We're just a piece of that. It's not really any different than us. It's just been around the block a few more times in different reality frames than we have. But there is this larger consciousness system, and in my work, I start with that assumption. Assume that consciousness exists. That's where you start from. And there's some good mathematics that back up consciousness arising out of kind of random complex events. We have mathematics that shows that if you have something that can move, it can change, it's got degrees of freedom, and you let it go, it will tend to self-organize. It's called emergent complexity theory. And as it self-organizes, it lowers its entropy. Okay, so we can say that's part of it. And then we have another piece of mathematics called cellular automata, and they show you that if you have just a very small rule set, just a simple little rule, if this, do that kind of a rule, that these cellular automata can create complex patterns. That's in my book, I refer to that as the process fractal. It's this little simple process, and like a fractal, it can take a little simple process and build up very complex things. And then on the backside of this consciousness evolution, we have mathematics that shows you that there are simple equations. Well, they're not real simple equations, but simple equations sounds better than really complex, hard equations. There are simple equations that can be used to model anything. They're like general purpose ways of modeling whatever. Any kind of a model. You can take these equations and eventually work them into a model of that. So we see all three of those together, the emergent complexity, the cellular automata, and that there are simple ways to produce systems within the computer information systems that can model anything else. So you take all that together, then that's where the boss comes from, right? The boss is this larger consciousness system. And we are pieces of that because the boss, all by himself, all by herself.
Thank you.
The boss, all by herself, just interacting with her own awareness is very limited. That's like you. If you were to go get in the closet this afternoon and not come out, just stay by yourself or go sit in a cave, you'd be very limited. your interactions would not be as rich, and your opportunities to grow would not be as often and as frequent, because now it's just you and your thoughts, and you're interacting only with yourself. That's a very minor subset of the possibilities. So what biology and what consciousness have done is that they duplicate themselves. You know, cells divide. They get together and build larger things, and they divide, they procreate. Well, this consciousness thing created other individuated units of it that interact with each other to provide opportunities and diversity and new ways of looking at things. And then they have free will, so if they didn't, what they did wouldn't be meaningful. If they were just following a script, now you're back to talking to yourself again, because you're writing the script, and you'd have all these little puppets doing the script. You have to give them free will, which means they can make bad decisions and good decisions, and now you have good and evil, and you get this whole thing. So here we are growing up. We're part of this system. We're just pieces of the same system. So consciousness is consciousness, and our piece of consciousness isn't all that different from the fundamental beginning piece of consciousness that started it all. We're just more limited than the whole thing. You know, any subset's limited compared to the whole part. So we're it, it's us, and it's a natural evolving system trying to succeed by lowering its entropy. These emergent complexity systems in mathematics, they'll build up, they'll lower their entropy, they'll get to some point, and they have to find something stable, some process that's stable for them. That's where the cellular automata come in. The cellular automata give them a chance for a simple process to become stable. And if they're not stable, they may fly and just dissolve and disappear, because they can't ever get organized. They can't get something going. And that cellular automata gives them a chance to get to something going that allows progression. And then once that progresses, then it's just, you know, it's evolution. It keeps going, and the system itself knows that it must continue to put on the pressure to evolve, because as soon as it stops growing, it'll start disintegrating. If you do nothing, everything disappears. That's sort of like the second law of thermodynamics. It says that entropy, left alone by itself, always increases, stays the same. It always gets bigger. If you don't tend to things, if you don't take care of things, they start to come apart. If you don't put energy into something being, it'll start to fall apart. You take your car and you park it out in the field and come back 20 years later, it doesn't work, it's falling apart. Everything disintegrates without constant maintenance and use and effort. It's the same with the consciousness system. Without that constant effort and making choices and you know, processing your intent, the system starts to disintegrate. So it can't sit back. That's why we never get to the point where we say we're done. All right, we take our little individual units of consciousness, we get up to this point, that's the headwaters, we're done. We're finished now. Finished now is not a, you know, is not an eventuality that you can do. Eventually, if you give up and you're finished now, that's the beginning of the end. Now you start to disintegrate and go the other way. It takes constant effort to hold things together and to grow them. They just don't, it's not like, well, I'm gonna work real hard on my family and my wife and my kids and everybody will be happy and all right, they're all happy now, I quit. You know, what happens? You know, the whole thing falls apart. You keep working, you keep at it, you keep lowering entropy. That's how you survive. That's how the system survives. So the answer isn't that we get at the top and it's done. That we just keep working at it, because the whole thing is changing. It's not a fixed thing. It's not like, well, we'll all get to the point that there's no entropy left and we squeezed all the entropy out and now we're all done, because there's always new entities coming in at the bottom. There's always something else to grow, another challenge to do. And the fact that there's no challenges right now, that's a big challenge in itself. We need challenges. If we don't have challenges, it's a problem for us. So everything turns out to be a challenge. Even having no challenge is a challenge. So there's no end point. There is no end point. And that hits some people very wrong, because they feel like, well, I've paid my dues, I've done my things, you know, this is my last go around, I'm done after this. You know, this place sucks, I don't want to be here anymore, it's nasty, I don't like all these people, they're so dumb, You know, they don't know, they're not smart like me. You know, they have this attitude and they say, oh, I'm done. This is my last incarnation. I'm not coming back here. And I've learned everything there is to learn. I don't have any ego and I don't have any fear, you know. They have that attitude. And, you know, if you look at that attitude, it's obviously very self-centered. It's all about me, what I want. I don't want to come back here because I'm having a hard time. Why am I having a hard time? Because I got all this fear and I got all this ego is why I'm having a hard time, which is why I want out. And you don't ever get done because let's say, just for example, you did lose your fear and are very low entropy. Well, it's not just about you. Now you can become a teacher. Now you can help create environments where other people can grow up. And where's the end of that? The end of that is only when everybody has very low entropy. Well, it keeps coming up from the bottom. New stuff keeps coming up. We have to keep working, making the system go, because as soon as we all sit back and quit, the system starts to unravel. So you see, you never get there. So you just keep going. And some people, that's really an annoying idea. They want to be done. They want to have an endpoint, a goal that when they reach it, they don't have to put up with this stuff anymore. Well, the fact that they are putting up with stuff and have that attitude tells you that they have a long way to go. They're still, it's not about other, it's about them. And their discomfort is unpleasant to them and they want to fix it. So I don't know if that answers your question, but there's just no end point to it. We don't grow up and sit on a cloud and play our harp and everything is happy forever after, you know, end of the story. That only happens in fairy tales. You know, it's not the way the real world works. It's constant growth, constant becoming, and you need to work at becoming love. That's something that takes effort. It's not something that you just get, and then once you've gotten it, you can retire. There's always challenges. There's always people to help.
Tom, thank you for sharing your wisdom. I have a real applied question. I'm in Huntsville and I work with soldiers who have returned from 4 and 5 deployments by the time they're 28 and 30 years old. And as you know, we're losing a lot of people. And I work in suicide prevention and healing with Labyrinth work. Could you please address specifically for me how your worldview could enlarge choice space for those who have decided to leave because they think there is no other choice?
Sure. Suicide is a result of having a very narrow worldview, a very small decision space, where all the choices you think you have in the world get less and less and less until you have these blinders on and all you can see is what's horrible. What's wonderful, what's beautiful, and what's challenging don't exist for you. That part of the world is gone. All you see is what's horrible. So it comes from a tunnel vision. A very small amount of decision space is behind both depression and, of course, suicide. So what we can do for those people is, you know, you can't tell them, you can't shake them and say, listen, you got a lot to live for. Look at this and look at this. You can try that, but all you're going to do is depress them more if you tell them that. You see, that's not going to help. Again, that's pushing the dog and they push back. That's not going to help them because all you're doing is making them feel worse about themselves. Because look, there's all this stuff you could be doing and you're not paying any attention to it. And they either say, no, there isn't anything good out there, or they say, yeah, I'm a crud, aren't I? You see, either case, it's a lose or a lose. So you're going to help them lose. Either way they go there. So the point is, we don't try to explain to them how they're wrong. We try to help them see a bigger decision space. Help them see that there are other choices out there. Well, this could, you know, here's a way, and there's other things that you could do, and things will change, and they're like, no, that won't work, nothing will change, is their idea. Often, there's two things that will change them more than anything else. One, if you can get them to become authentic, I guess. So instead of living in their heads and living in their fear, they embrace the experiences that they've had. Horrible experiences that they've had that have made them feel very bad about themselves, which is why they close in. So what you can do is, one, talk about it. If you can get them to own that. This is my experience. Yes, it was horrible. Not say, oh, it wasn't so bad. You know, that's the wrong thing to say. It's just help them come to terms with their experience. Yes, this was the experience. Talk about it. Get it out. Draw pictures about it. Whatever it takes. You know, maybe being verbal's too much. Maybe drawing pictures about it would be better. And not necessarily talking to you about it, but talking to somebody they feel that they can trust, like maybe somebody else that has been in that same situation. You know, maybe group therapy kind of things. Let them talk to each other because they trust each other, because each other's have been there and they know what it was like. That would be one thing you can do to get them not to run from the experience that they had, but to get them to embrace it and accept it that it was their experience. Okay. Then the second thing that you can do that will help them a lot is give them the security, care for them, give them the idea that no matter what you tell me you did or you saw, that's okay. You can tell me anything, and they need to get the idea that you're not going to judge them, because they're judging themselves very harshly. And if they think you're going to judge them too, then you know they can't talk to you. So you have to develop that kind of rapport that you will not judge them. You will just listen. You will just take it in. And then if you can get that step one and step two, where they own it, to where they feel secure enough that you're not going to judge them, then the last thing you can do is start pointing out where the positive things are. Opening up, prying up open that decision space to what, you know, what other things out there. Is there some relationship? Is there something that could be positive? And letting them rebuild their self-esteem for being good people, for having a soul, for being responsible. And they can start by, you know, being, once they kind of come to terms and own their experiences, now you know you can always grow up, you can always change. Okay, that's what you did, that's what you saw. Now what are we going to do and see with the rest of your life? You know, how are we going to make a positive impact on things? What can you do to help somebody else? All right, you're helpless, but let's find somebody else that you can help, that you could do something good for. And you can often motivate them to help somebody else. And then eventually in that helping, it will heal themselves. So set them up to do something for somebody. Is there some in-law, some cousin, somebody that you could do something for? You know, cut wood for them, do whatever. You know, give them something to do where they're being helpful and they're being a positive part of the world. And then they can see, oh, I can do good things. I can help people. I can make a difference. And as they see that, then they can see a future. There's a future in being a good person. People like you. You have credits against your name, not just debits for the things you've done and seen, but now you're starting to pile up credits, and that's good. That starts to open the decision space so that they can see something more than just what's horrible. It lets in an array of, well, maybe there's some things I can do that aren't so horrible, and build on that. So that would be my very particular advice for those kinds of people, that you have to let them, you have to give them the opportunity to grow themselves. You can't explain it to them. It's not a rational process. You can't tell them about all the wonderful things that they could do and so on. They have to come to that in their own way, in their own terms. And as much as you try to explain it to them intellectually and rationally, it won't work, because they'll push back the other way. So it's not a matter of convincing them that the world isn't such an awful place and that they're not such awful people. You need to let them become somebody that's not so awful by doing some good things and by accepting what happened to them and then putting it behind them. They feel bad about themselves is their problem. That's the issue. They just feel so terrible. They are terrible people. They've done terrible things. They've seen other people do terrible things and not stepped in to stop it. They're part of this terrible thing that's going on. And because they feel so bad about themselves, the whole world is dark and black and hardly worth living. That's the thing. They got to see themselves in a better light.
And they take our projection.
Oh, yes.
Our projection.
Absolutely.
All the terrible, horrible things that we were.
Well, that's your judgment. That's why I say you have to give them an environment where you're not judging them, because they judge themselves and they believe that everybody else is judging them as well. Right. So you have to give them that security to where they don't feel judged. Otherwise, they can't take the next step. Hope that helps.
If we go back to the World of Warcraft model, the character in the World of Warcraft is not making decisions. The player is making the decisions.
That's right.
So if you want to look at our reality model, we're not making decisions. Our IUOC, actually the constrained part, the FWAU, is actually making the decision. That affects the data stream with the rule set and the other people's decision, and that's what creates reality. Is that?
Yes, that's the way it works. So we are the consciousness playing World of Warcraft. The little elf is not conscious. That's just our avatar.
And that's us.
That's our body,
Yeah.
our physical body, our virtual physical body, right? It appears physical to us, as just like the elf kind of appears physical on our screen, on our monitor. That is not physical. That's just information. So our body's just information, an avatar. No decisions, doing nothing, just a physical appearing thing so that we can interact with people with a rule set. Same with the elf. It's us with the mouse and the joystick that are making the decisions. Our consciousness is like that. Our consciousness is making all the decisions and the choices and calling all the shots. And out here in this simulation, our little physical bodies are out doing whatever our consciousness, instructs them to do. We're reacting that way.
So how do we get information over the RWW? What filters that? How does inspiration come in from that? Because we would obviously have access to a lot of data if we knew how to access it or if it was going to be beneficial to us. And it seems like some of that data must come down as inspiration or...
Well, the inspiration is part of what we bring to it. We're consciousness. And we can be inspired to do something. We can be motivated to do something, and that's our intent. See, that's the quality of our consciousness. What the data we get is the information that keeps this a multiplayer game. Okay, we've got a multiplayer game going. We need to have data, and the data needs to match up between you and I, so we're both in the same room at the same time, having this conversation. And here our bodies are moving around, and you're listening through physical ears, and I'm talking with a mouth, and we both see each other with eyes. So we have all this data that allows us to interact this way with this rule set. But what's going on behind is our consciousness. Now, our consciousness can be inspired, can be self-centered, it's not like the consciousness is all loving and whatever. It's the consciousness is us. We act like the consciousness because we're just avatars. Our bodies are avatars. When I say me, I'm usually talking about my consciousness. Most people, when they say me, they're talking about their body. So it's a little confusing when we do this. But anyway, yes, it's the consciousness that's there. The data stream keeps the game going. And we also can get inspiration, on another track. We can also get inspiration. We can get messages. We can get inclinations. We can get intuitive, downloads that help us grow up. That's often the synchronicity. You get something just happens. You just get a hint. Your intuition says to do something, and it turns out to be important to your life. Those kinds of things, I think, are gifts that we get through our, through connection with the data stream to help us out. And why would we get those? Well, because the system is growing because we're growing. We reduce entropy, its entropy is reduced because we're it. Not all of it, but we're a piece of it. So sometimes we get help. Things just work when we need them because that's the best road to our own growth.
When you say that if a player is successful, that we will replay that player, what do you mean by that? Because I think you've also said that the only thing that we keep is our QOC. We don't really keep, our life goes into the past data bank, and then that's kind of gone. So when you say that you replay a character as long as they're successful in learning, what do you mean by that? What attributes?
Okay.
Is it just if they're fearful, they're going to come in and they're going to exhibit that fear no matter where they are? Or do they really, bring something back from other lifetimes?
Well, the way that works is that a character, and when we're talking about a character, now we're talking about the physical avatar, but with the consciousness personality, right? It's the consciousness that gives the avatar the personality and the choices. Okay, if you have a combination, if you have something that works well, okay, this kind of collection of attributes from an IUOC, Individuated Unit of Consciousness, for those of you that aren't used to this acronym, QOC, Quality of Consciousness. Some of you maybe, what is this? What language are they speaking? But anyway, you have this Individuated Unit of Consciousness. That's us. That's the player, not the body. And you have probably played this game thousands of times. So you're having thousands of avatars in this game, male, female, died young, died old, rich, poor. You've probably been through it all. And you're learning from all of them. Sometimes you'll find that a certain combination of traits, characteristics, works good for you. And it may be female works really good for you. You kind of resonate with that, and you get along better. You deal with the constraints, the constrained female rather than the constraints, constrained male, and that makes a space in which you can just work better. You like working from that angle rather than from the other angle. Well, then you would probably incarnate more females than males because you do better with it. You learn more there. There's those kinds of opportunities that females get more than males to let go of ego, work with you. And there's some would work on the other side. And you just kind of, you go with what works. Now, you're not going to get an avatar and then reproduce that avatar exactly. It's not like you come back just the way you were. So here you are, and you are so tall and so wide and whatever. You have red hair, and you're going to come back next time and you're going to be exactly that same person, a duplicate image. You're just going to redo that character. Not likely. It doesn't work that way. That character that you are here, that avatar, is done when it's done. And it's very difficult to reconstruct all that because there's a lot of uncertainty in the biology that went together to make that. So it's really hard to reconstruct, and there's really no purpose in that.
But what other attributes would there be besides like sex? Whether you're a male or female, what other attributes in a character would you want to kind of replay in that next character?
Well, there may be situations, and let's say you had character that was particularly introverted or extroverted. You may work well as an extrovert. Never met a stranger. That may be good for you. You may work well as an introvert, where you're kind of quiet and inside and do most of your work thinking on your own without interacting with other people. That would be a major characteristic. You could be, very clever, smart, quick, or that may just get you into trouble. That clever, smart, and quick may just dig you a hole every time. You may not want to be so smart, clever, and quick. You may want to be a little more of a plotter because you actually get more done that way. Or maybe smart and quick, is just the way you get by because that's your thing. So it could be lots of things like that you'd want to accentuate. And what that would mean is when you're ready to incarnate here, you'd kind of pick a situation. You can say, well, here's a situation, and you could kind of look at the potential there and the constraints, which means you're looking at the genes. You're looking at what's the potential here. These two people have constraints on what it is they're going to produce. You know, if they're both dark-skinned and they have brown eyes and black hair, they're not going to produce a Swedish-looking, blonde that's, if they're very short, they're not going to produce a lot of tall people. So you kind of look at and say, well, where do I want to be? Where do I think is good for me? Where am I going to get the best run here for my, for the time I'm going to put into it? Where am I going to learn the most? Where's the challenges that I need? I'm weak in such and such. This would be a good challenge. I'll work well with this. And then you pick that. You say, this is good for me. Now that's only if you've been around enough that you know enough how to pick. And other people will help you pick. You're not just jumping in to get experience. So at that time you can pick that situation. So you kind of pick your parents, if you will. You're not necessarily picking these two people unless you really know them and want to do that. But you may just be picking a type, a characteristic. And I've really been, really stingy all my life or whatever. I really need to try being poor. So you might want to work in a poor side of town when you were born that time and see how that feels as opposed to the other. So you pick things, and you may want to incarnate with entities that you work well with. There are these other entities, and we just really work, we feed each other, sort of like the comedian and his straight man, right? They just feed each other. And you may have some people that work like that with you, and then you kind of incarnate as a team. And you may be the mother, and they may be your son, or you may be the son, and they may be your father. You can mix it up all over the place, but you just work well together. And when you meet people like that, you just have this innate connectedness to them. You feel kind of close to them immediately. If you have that sort of connection going, you don't really have to get to know them, or there's just immediate connection there. So there's all different ways that you can kind of program your experience of what it's going to be. But after all that's done and all that planning's done, well, then you grab the roulette wheel, give it a spin, and the biology does whatever it does, and it all comes out some way or another, and from there you have experiences and you react. You make choices and you go this way or that way, and whether that planning pays off or not, it might pay off really well. It might just totally come apart and not be helpful at all.
What happens with these, and they're fairly rare, but it does happen, these instances, and you'll see this child, there's a little girl and she's about 7 and she sings like an opera singer. I mean, like a full grown woman opera singer, and there's another little girl who sings like an old blues and jazz singer. So, I mean, it's just such an odd case. What happens in that?
Sometimes those kinds of characteristics come through. Sometimes, we always hear about these child prodigies that are, 4 years old and have been playing classical music, for 2 of those 4 years. They're good at it. And they just adapt to it very quickly. And whereas some other child says, play the piano, I go outside. Are you kidding me? But this child says, I need a piano. Get me a piano, please. And they're only 2.5 years old. They can barely say piano, but they know they want one. And then they learn very, very quickly. Yes, that can be knowledge gained several ways. One, you could have done that, been very good at it, and been so good at it that it was such a good experience. It was so meaningful to you in your life that you want to do it again. So you come in with that, it's like programming your dreams. You can do that. Like if you want to do a lucid dream, you can just program your mind. I want to wake up in my dream. When I have a dream, I'm going to wake up, and you keep telling yourself that, and that'll raise the probability, because now you have an intent, you're going to raise the probability that it'll happen. Well, you can do the same thing coming the other way. You want to get into music because that was really a wonderful experience, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 times. Maybe that was a place where you really shine and did a lot of growth in that environment. So you just come in musical.
But it's odd that they don't come in and develop something. It's like they came in as almost the persona that they were. I mean, it's an adult voice. It's not a child's voice. It's very odd.
Yeah, it is odd, but a lot of odd things happen in a virtual reality. So, and everything isn't easily explainable in a virtual reality. Sometimes the system just does what it does just to tweak us. Some of the strangest things will happen and you wonder why, And the only reason is they're there to make you wonder why they happen. You know, they just tweak you to look at the reality and say, well, this is strange. Something's going on there. You know, why is this kid singing like an adult? Why does this little boy, what was a little boy who was 10 or 11 years old, and he had all this information about flying an airplane in a previous life. And he could tell you his plane he flew, you know, the kind and the type it was, and I think even his name, who he was, and what happened to him, and he got shot down over a certain place. And they go back in the history and they find, sure, there was a guy like that, and he did fly a plane just like that, and he got shot down there. Well, that's a whole lot of, you know, that's a whole lot of stuff to run in a row, you know, for somebody who's 8 years old or 10 years old and probably didn't read that in the book. So strange things happen. So why does that happen? Just because somebody says, wow, look at this, and they put it on the internet, and you know, 1 million people see it, and it opens minds. So, you know, there's something going on here that's bigger than just this materialist thing with all these particles. You know, I can tell it's bigger than that. And when you open that mind, you set people up to grow. You know, you're opening them up to the possibilities of reality. So a lot of that strange stuff, I think the system just does it, not for any particular reason. That child prodigy may decide to go weave baskets instead, you know, but he wakes up a whole lot of people by being a child prodigy. May not mean a whole lot here, but it helps everybody. So I think some of the weirdness is just that way.
I need to log in the digital program. Take a 10-minute break. 6 minutes.
One of the things I don't get is the whole notion of an individuated unit of consciousness. Now, so we're broken up into individuated units, and then a little piece is broken off, and that becomes us. But we're bigger than just the us that's here.
Right.
So I know this is sort of a weird question, but like how many of us could there be? And you, in Spokane, you said that one of the things you can do is that if you have a plan, you don't have to wait. You can put that plan in motion now.
Plan for what?
Well, like if you wanted to, let's say you wanted to teach kids something like what you're talking about, but you don't have to wait because since you're a bigger you're bigger than just the little piece that you are,
right.
that you could
start another incarnation while this one's still going on.
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah.
You could. Now, generally, it's not real efficient to parallel process as opposed to going serially, because serially you learn something and the next one gets to benefit by that learning, and you learn something, the next one gets to benefit. So, you know, that's why we go to school so many years, because learning's an iterative process. So you learn something, you pass it on. You grow a little, you pass it on. Whereas if you sent 100 entities here, all at the same time, they wouldn't really benefit as much from each other's experience. They'd all be going on the same experience that they started from. Now you'd speed up the process in the sense that you'd have 100 here experiencing, but they'd all be experienced at the same level. Whereas if they come one at a time, each one adds growth to the next, to the next, to the next. So parallel processing spreads you out kind of horizontally, gives you more experience faster, but serially gives you depth because you're passing on the learning. So basically we tend to be serial unless we have a special reason not to. Then we can be parallel. Sometimes it's relationship driven. Sometimes what's special is that you and your son are both from the same entity, and you get a chance to come and interact with yourself. You as the mother and you as the child, because that's very instructive for both of you, seeing those different perspectives at the same time. And now you're learning from both ends of it. Or maybe you, the rich one, and you, the poor one, you're the prince and the pauper, you know. Now you're experiencing from both ends of that situation, and that you can learn more if you get that all together, you know, at the same time, instead of doing one and doing the other. So there's some experiences that really are good if the relationship kind of brings out things that otherwise you'd miss. So that's why you can, you know, that's why it happens some, but it's not the rule. It's the exception mostly than the rule, and usually it's a special relationship connection. And you might even have, you know, a father, son, and grandson, or a father, son, and granddaughter. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to all be the same sex, that are all from the same individuated unit of consciousness and are all interacting together. Just because it's
So, but that's really
useful.
really interesting. But let's say the normal situation.
Right. It's
Okay,
one at a
so-
time, typically.
Yeah, so one at a time, and if we're only a piece
Mm-hmm.
of our individuated unit of consciousness, what's the rest of the individuated
What's it doing?
unit of consciousness doing?
Well, it's doing several things. One, it's the integration, right? It's taking what we're doing. So we're part of it, and we're feeding back its data all the time, all of our feelings, all of our intents and actions and choices and all that. And it's taking that data and it's integrating it with all the other 1,000 lives that we've been doing. In other words, because sometimes, you know, when you get data, you get more information. It's not just that information, but how does that information integrate with all this other information? You may learn something here that solves a problem someplace else. So it's doing all the integration between the current experience and all the other experiences. It's also probably doing some of the planning for the next experience based on what's happening here. So it has that, you know, it has that much going on for it. It's also perhaps, you know, and it depends on how you want to do this. It also may be communicating with you. It may be your intuition. Your intuition may be things that it's getting, that it's passing to you. Oh, look, we just made a connection here. You know, you need to understand this, you know, and kind of give you, and you down here get the intuition. Oh, suddenly, I get it. Okay, it makes sense now. You know, sometimes you get those things that just make sense. And it's that. So its role as an integrator and is to make sure it gives you all the support you need to do what you need to do here as best as it can. So it's not like it's necessarily a little tiny fragment. It may be a considerable part of it, or if it's got enough going on, it may have 3 or 4 going at once, and it just can be done lots of different ways. But that's what the rest of it is doing. It's interacting, and could be also interacting on its own, in its own world. It may have this going on and have other things going on. There may be other reality frames. It's hard to say. Depends on the individual.
Is it sharing the data with you always, or something?
Not intellectually, but usually intuitively, it shares the data. Sometimes you get it intellectually. I know I have. Sometimes you just hear a voice. I mean, something just tells you, you know, turn left. I mean, it just comes right out of the blue, you know, don't go there, you know, bad trip, don't go. And usually I pay attention when that happens. I've learned to pay attention because I say, yeah, I'm just making that up, and then something happens and you go, oh, that's what that was all about. So I've learned just to pay attention, and generally I do those things. It's some, you know, my intuition's trying to give me a hint, and I shouldn't be so thick-headed that I don't pay attention to it. So yeah, it is working. It is working with you. You have help.
Yeah, I know. I feel like it. I just didn't know exactly the source.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. You see, when we talk about this individuated unit of consciousness, IUOC, and then we have you, the free will awareness unit, and then we have, you know, the larger consciousness system, you have to realize that all these things are really models. They're metaphors. What we do is we have one thing, consciousness. Consciousness is a big thing. Consciousness is interacting in multiple ways, in multiple environments, because it learns more that way. And we break it up into these separate chunks because we break it up by function. Here's this function. That's the free will awareness unit. That's the function that's here experiencing. Here's the integrated unit of consciousness, and that's the integrator, putting it all together. Here's the larger conscious system. You know, that's the one that started it all. But it's not really true to think that all these things have hard boundaries between them. They don't. We do that. We piece part stuff here because that's the way we think. We want everything to be in a little pigeonhole. But it's really, I tend to just talk about, well, you know, where'd that intuition come from? Larger consciousness system. What about the IUOC? Well, that's really the larger consciousness system. What about the free will? That's really the larger consciousness system. See, it's all the larger consciousness system in this game of interaction. So the breakout of the pieces and the piece parts and how they relate is pretty arbitrary. It's sort of like the chakras, right? You break out the chakras and it helps people. It makes sense because it divides things up and says, oh, no, that's your root chakra and that's this, and it kind of piece part stuff around that our minds can more easily deal with. It's just a model. It's a set of metaphors. Well, so is, higher self, individuated unit of consciousness, free will awareness unit. These are all metaphors for different functions of this whole process. Otherwise, it would be very difficult for us to wrap our mind around these various functions. Because if we just saw the whole thing as a whole and said, well, this is just one whole thing, but it does this and it does this and it does that, and we think, well, it's hard to grasp. Whereas if you say, well, we got this function, we call that the free will awareness unit. We got this function, and that's the individuated unit of consciousness. And then we explain a little bit about how those functions relate, but don't take it too seriously. It's not really like it's broken up into chunks. It's just an easy way to think about it so we can talk about this function and that function without having to always talk about everything at once. It makes it simpler. So it's just metaphors. It's not really separate things out there. It's just one thing, and that's the larger consciousness system, and we're just a part of that one thing. So let's say, who are we? Well, we're parts of the larger conscious system. Same with all those other things. So they're more of a tool for learning than they are something that actually happens.
Yeah, but the interaction does.
Yeah, within the system, these functions, all these functions take place inside the larger consciousness system. And it helps us understand them and see how they relate when we break them out like that. So yeah, all those functions are separate functions, and those separate functions are done. But if we take it too seriously and we try to take those functions and define them too tightly, we're kidding ourselves. We're making up stuff that sounds good, but it's not necessarily the way it is.
Well, you don't push it, you just use it as
I just use it, just use it as far as it goes, where it makes sense, and then realize it's a tool for understanding. It's not well, now you have this, and this is plugged into that. It's not like the hip bones, hooked to the leg bone, it's hooked to the foot bone, and all. It's not quite like that. It's not that discrete. We just have separate functions for separate reasons. We have to have an integration function. We have to have the experiential function. We have to have the headquarters function. We have all that stuff, and that's going in us, and that's what we are, pieces of a larger consciousness system. And we do all these various kinds of functions in the process. So that's a better way to look at it than take those metaphors too far. If you take anything too far, you'll stumble over it, and it'll start to confuse you because it won't make sense. It's just how exactly does this connect to that? Well, I didn't want to get in that much detail. They just kind of connected, that sort of thing.
Perfect, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
When you're talking about this, it's really useful for me to, make art, and actually I made a piece that I want to get to. But how you've got to get out of your own head, get out of your way so you can allow this to stay fluid and be able to move forward. And I find that when you're talking about, this is really helpful for me to see it visually because you get away from the head where it just makes so much more sense.
It does. If you try to be too specific with it and nail everything down to a detail, you just confuse yourself. It's better, like you say, to intuitively get a grasp of the whole thing, and then it just intuitively makes sense. And that's much better. Otherwise, your head will do this intellectual thing of trying to draw all the lines, put little boxes, put pieces in the box, connect all the boxes with lines, and then you worry, well, was that connected with 2 lines or just 1 line? Or how thick was that line? And now you're going into the detail that just isn't important.
Let me get out of my own way.
Yeah, right. Get all that yama intellect trying to slice and dice everything to perfection. Just let it sit down and be quiet.
Can you say also about, I was talking to this about how when something gets stated, like with the slit, if I feel a pain and I decide to go to the doctor, my hesitations is that they're going to determine what's going on, the probability, it might be.
Right.
So I go,
you just put constraints onto the problem that weren't there before.
Like that happened to me actually about a month ago. I had a fall, and I had pain, and I didn't go, and I thought, I'm just going to get better. Just allow it to happen.
Let your intuition tell you that. You see, your intuition needs to tell you, should I go? And of course, as soon as you say, well, intuition, what should I do? The intellect jumps in and starts giving you all the reasons why you ought to do things. But if you can let that intellect stay out of it, your intuition will tell you, because sometimes what you need to do is go. Because if there's a little lump there, and that lump is a bad lump and needs to come out, you don't want to wait and take it out later. You want to take it out now while it's easier to take out and while it goes out. So you don't want to say, well, let your intuition do. Sometimes you need to go, sometimes you need to do it yourself. And your intuition is a very good guide if you can get your intellect out of the way so it doesn't confuse you. And often that's in meditation. If you get in a good meditation state, you're a little more removed from your intellect, a little more existing at the being level. So that's a good time to ask those questions. In a good meditation state, just bring that up and just kind of float it there without any expectation of what the answer might be. If you have an expectation, well, I sure hope my intuition says don't go, then that'll be in the way. So you just have to have no expectations. I'll just see what happens. I'll float it out and see if an answer comes. And then an answer will come and you'll say, did I make that up? And then you say, well, let's try it again. Just relax, you know, and you give an answer. And eventually you'll kind of get a sense of the intuition that it's right, and then do what it says. And then accept the consequences. If it turns out you should have gone, you didn't, well, that's, yeah, what am I going to learn from this path? Right, every path is another learning opportunity. But so you don't know ahead of time. Don't be afraid of the uncertainty. Do what you think's right. That usually works out. It's not that it has to always work out, but on the average, if that's the way you live your life is very successful. Not necessarily very long, but very successful. See, the two aren't the same. It really needs to be successful. You have to learn from it and you grow from it. That's the key. It's not what do I do, you know, to make it as long as possible. It's what do I do to make it as productive as possible. And you make it more productive if you're just authentic and you follow your intuition and you do it.
And negative consequences can be a positive learning experience.
Exactly. Absolutely. Yeah, everything can be a positive learning experience. Right. Depends on how you deal with it. That's what's important. Hello.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
I am Marco. This is Elena.
Elena.
I am from Mexico and she's from Ukraine.
Ah, okay.
I have been following your YouTube videos for probably a couple of years.
Oh, but you weren't in Mexico when I was down there, were you?
Because I was working in Atlanta by then. I wasn't there. Yeah. And I want to tell you one of the videos that were particularly useful for me was the interview that somebody made about relationships. With Evita. Yeah.
With who? Oh, Evita. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I'm still working my way around that, but trying to get rid of the ego. But it was very useful for me.
Good.
Probably, I don't know, probably she can tell me.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Yeah, that's an important one. You know, that's where a lot of your potential learning is in these close relationships. That's where you grow up. It's harder there. Well, let's put it another way. It's easier there to discover your fear and your ego. I mean, that's a place where it just stands out. It's when you have these relationships. Yeah, that's where, if you got this ego and you got this fear and you got this need to control and you got all this other stuff, man, in your relationship with your significant other, that just comes out. It's just clear and easy to see. Yeah. So relationships are really neat that way.
Way past your 10 minutes.
All right, yeah. Glad you could come. Yeah. Okay.